So React 19 just dropped, well, almost like a week ago, but the Vite version is still not updated, although you can update it yourself. It's easy, not a problem. Yeah, let's just go over the changes. Actions. A common use case in React apps is to perform data mutation and then update state in response. For example, when a user submits a form to change their name, you will make an API request and then handle the response. In the past, you would need to handle pending states, error, optimistic updates, and sequential requests manually. Yeah, that was a great way to make mistakes. Yeah, that looks like a thing. But in React 19, we are adding support for using async functions in transition to handle pending states, errors, forms, and optimistic updates automatically. For example, you can use transition to handle the pending state for you. So I made a super simple example. We got the main, and yeah, we got the app, and we got the update name. And in here, we are using a dummy promise I made in the helper, which is basically just a timeout. After 2 seconds, we're gonna get cake. Just for simplification. So this is what we have, and you gotta make sure that you update the types or it's not gonna work. I don't think we need this redirect path for our use case. So we got a base name of nothing. We're setting the name with the await dummy promise. So when we get the promise, when it resolves, we're gonna be setting the name, and this start transition handles, well, basically everything we're gonna need. And while it's pending, which is coming from the use transition, we're gonna be just displaying a loading state. So this is how it looks like. We can update, well, usually you would not update like this, but sure, we're gonna update, and we wait, we see a loading state, and then we get cake in it. So it's a definitely useful hook. I mean action, although this is kind of a dumb example, although a simple one. The async transition will immediately set the isPending state to true, make the async request, and switch isPending to false after any transition. This allows you to keep the current UI responsive and interactive while the data is changing. By convention, functions that use async transitions are called actions. Actions automatically manage submitting data for you. Pending state. Actions provide a pending state that starts at the beginning of a request and automatically resets when the final state update is committed. Optimistic updates. Actions support the new use optimistic hook so you can show users instant feedback while the requests are submitting. Error handling. Actions provide error handling so you can display error boundaries when a request fails and revert optimistic updates to their original value automatically. Forms. Elements now support passing functions to the action and form action props. Passing functions to the action props use actions by default and reset the form automatically after submission. I don't know about you guys, but like when I read things, it's like, oh, okay. But I only really get things when I just bang rocks together. Building on top of actions, React 19 introduces use optimistic to manage optimistic updates and the new hook React use action state to handle common cases for actions. In React DOM, we are adding form actions to manage forms automatically and use form status to support the common cases for actions in forms. In React 19, the above example can be simplified too. So I would say in this case, it would be wise to also read the use action state information. So we see that the use action state has state, form action, and isPending. And better just go to an example. That's gonna make it obvious. So we are taking a function, and this is the default state, and we are incrementing. But this is kind of the error state of the form. There is a better example here. So action, form action, and we got the state. They're not showing it in TypeScript, nor they added a TypeScript example. It is fine. I cooked it up. So we got the app, and we are doing nothing here other than just throwing it a name and a set name with useState. And then we got the change name here. So obviously we're typing the props that's coming in. And I added some times here. So the previous state is error or null, and the form data obviously is form data. We're adding a promise here just to get to experience the isPending state. And yeah, we are checking for errors, and otherwise, our initial state is null. So that's kind of what we're gonna be getting. The previous state is gonna be null. And when we are pending, we get loading, and when there's an error, we get And we get the function here. This is like nothing. We just like set the name to the string, which is form data entry value or null. So you gotta convert it to string, but otherwise it's pretty obvious. And we gotta throw an error. So let's see how it works. Let's go with whatever. As update. So we're gonna go loading, and that's it. And it's not very glamorous. But if you have nothing, then it's also gonna be loading into I also ended up using the name that the example was presenting as the default name. So I think you can get it, but like you might need to try it out for like a few minutes to get it. Actions are also integrated with React 19's new form features. For React DOM, we've added support for passing functions as the action and form action props of form, input, and button elements to automatically submit forms with actions. You can see it over here, but probably a better way to see it is the submit action. So we automatically taking the payload and it just returns void. When a form action succeeds, React will automatically reset the form for uncontrolled components. If you need to reset the form manually, you can call the new request form reset React DOM API. Sure. React DOM new hook, use form status. In design systems, it's common to write design components that need access to information about the form they are in without drilling props down to the component. This can be done via context, but to make the common case easier, we have added new hook, use form status. So, use form status basically means that we have access to information about the form. There are better examples here, but screw it, mine is the best. So, I made a form status component. And we use nothing but the use form status hook with pending. And when we are pending, then the button says loading, otherwise it says submit. So I just put in to the previous change name component. It is important that you need to make it a separate component and need to put it inside the form. Because, for example, if I put form here, then it will not work. It will not have access to the the form status. And this is what we have. A tiny bit of styling. Okay, so we update. This is the same thing as before, but added the new submit button, which does nothing. Actually, that works too. Okay, update. And it says loading, and fair enough. So it has access to information of the form. Okay, another super simple example. We got use optimistic here, and we scroll down, and it's important to see how it works. So optimistic state, add optimistic. So we got the state. This is gonna be the value we are optimistically updating. This is the previous state of it. It's not super relevant right now, and this is the new value. So this is how it looks like. We are using the name because that's what we are optimistically updating. And essentially we are taking a new name and we are just returning that new name. So this is the simplest example I can think of. We're still using the update name function. The only change we really did is like I took out the field name and we are optimistically updating the field name here. And only after that, await new promise, well, there's gonna be a 2-second delay. And that's just kind of like to mock the update that might take some time. So I'll stop the styling a little bit, but it doesn't need to be explained. So by default, we have nothing. Right? But if I say AAA, then we update, and the regular name is only going to be updated after 2 seconds. The optimistic will be updated to AAA immediately. And we can just change it to AABDD. It's going to be same thing. Of course, the important part about this is that we can break it. So we have the set optimistic name, field name. So this is the field name that we got from the form data. But if I make this a string, obviously inaccurate, or I just rename it cake just to make it obvious. And we try this. So obviously, we are optimistically updating with the new value, which is not going to be correct right now. So update, it's updated to cake, and only, after the 2 seconds is up, it is corrected to the right value. Of course, in a real example, you would be trying to update the value in your database, and if it doesn't work, then it just resets to the previous value. In fact, reset is kind of a bad way to put it, because it just kind of looks like it was updated. It changed immediately. So this could be nice when you want to see a message right away, but this is not something that you would use everywhere. So I've undone the error here, but it is important to kind of break things a little bit, just to see why they work a certain way. New API, use. In React 19, we introduced a new API to read resources in render, use. For example, you can read a promise with use, and React will suspend until the promise resolves. So here's a simple example. We got dummy comments that we get up to 2 seconds. We got this. I made a comment box component. And we can see it takes a promise of content type, which is an idea and text. So we take an array of them. We wrap the comments component in suspense, and it's interesting that we are kind of drilling down a promise. But ultimately kind of functions like an async function here. So we just wait for the promise, and when we have the promise, we use the promise to display all the comments. So this is on the change name page. We're gonna refresh. And loading comments, and we got them. So you can pass in a promise, which when resolves, will get used by the component. You can also potentially read the context with it. The use API can only be called in render, similar to hooks. Unlike hooks, use can be called conditionally. In the future, we plan to support more ways to consume resources in render with use. They added 2 new APIs to React DOM static for static generation. I don't really care about that too much. We got server components too. Well, Next.js already has them. Server components are a new option that allows rendering components ahead of time before bundling in an environment separate from your client, application, or SSR server. This separate environment is the server in React Server Components. Server components can run once at build time on your CI server, or they can be run for each request using web server. Ultimately, this might not be that interesting, assuming you're gonna use Next.js anyway. There's no directive for server components. Common misunderstanding is that server components are denoted by use server, but there is no directive for server components. The use server directive is used for server actions. So it's automatically a server component, but you can use server. It's called server component. And you would need to define use client if you want that. I would argue that it's generally a better idea to write your actions separately instead of trying to inline it. Because over here we got a server component and the server function, which is kind of fine. I guess most components can be clients, but if you want to interact with the database, then you want the server. That's client 2. We got use server. Yeah, this is a database interaction. Also, anything that needs to be async, like not this one. Not this one either. If you need client-side interaction, then that's definitely use client. This is use client too. So seemingly most of these are still use client. Yeah, but this is an async one. Also a database interaction. I would argue a good way to conceptualize it is to use server everywhere, or at least the mindset of using server everywhere. And you want to make client components as small as possible, essentially. So even if you want interaction, you might not want the entire component to be a client component. You would want a server component with client components in it. I suppose it's good for like CEO and performance a little bit, but the main thing is that you don't want anything that needs to be on the server ending up on the client. Further improvements in React 19, ref as prop. Starting in React 19, you can access ref as a prop for function components. Okay. We also improved error reporting for hydration errors in React DOM. For example, instead of logging multiple errors in dev without any information about mismatch. Yes. It just makes me want to lay down on the floor and surrender. Yes, this is my favorite. Who cares about features? I care about docs and logging. In React 19, you can render context as a provider instead of context.provider. Okay. Now you can clean up refs. Okay. They also added use deferred value, initial value. We added initial value option to use deferred value. When initial value is provided, use deferred value, return it as value for initial render of the component as schedules a re-render and schedules a re-render in the background with the deferred value returned. Okay. Support for document metadata. Yeah, I think we got it. And there's definitely less to be excited about. If you already use Next.js, I would nominate use transition as my favorite one. Maybe use optimistic too. Also, just put my code in the description if you want it for some reason.